Hey,
Hey,
what's going on?
I am doing wonderfully. How about you?
Pretty good.
All right. Well, thank you for blessing us with your presence. How did you get yourself in this position? I caught a snippet. You had a big old stream talking about intersectionality. What can I ask? What led to that?
Yeah, I was at the Toronto Vegetarian Association speaking panel. I was at some vegan event in Toronto. They kicked me off the panel. They accused me of being racist, homophobic, sexist, misogynist, basically every name in the book. And then I found out it was this dude, Darren Chang. He's a big intersectional activist. So then I made a video just like defending myself, protecting my reputation. Then I challenged Darren Chang to a debate on intersectionality. One of the reasons I have an interest in intersectionality is because some of the ideas I can sort of understand and agree with to an extent, but there's a huge issue with the culture, especially when it comes to vegan activism. And it's like the cancel culture sort of aspect to it. So I challenged Darren Chang to a debate on intersectionality. He refused, and then
Oh,
just some other girl accepted.
and how'd that one go?
Pretty good.
Oh, nice.
I wasn't really convinced, towards her sort of opinion that, intersectionality is like the best form of activism or whatever, but I can understand where she's coming from. And I do, like, again, I do agree with some of the principles that, different forms of oppression should be dealt with. It's just that I don't agree with the idea that, sexism, racism, things like that, they're actually related, at least in any meaningful way.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
No. Let's hit it up. So first off, so did they like cite any particular reasons why they kicked you off the panel? Because I don't want to get like put into a position where I'm defending someone who was like, oh, one time they said the R slur on streams. We don't want that kind of shit in our community. I don't want to put myself in a position where I'm defending some like really woke scoldy stuff. So did they have like any substantial? Is there like
No,
drama
so
in the
I asked,
past or?
yeah, so like I've done a ton of controversial shit on my channel.
Hey, me too, buddy.
I don't know if you're familiar with my kind of content, but like especially when I first started, I was like kind of crazy.
I know you're fucking
And
yoked. You're going
yeah,
crazy on those fucking fibers.
yeah. So like, I was caught up in a controversy with that guy Repsion a while ago, where I regretted saying it, but I like threatened to kill him on stream, and people took it out of context. He was putting copyright claims on my channel, and I just got so pissed off about it because he was taking away my only source of income that like I just said something stupid. So they kind of referenced shit like that, and I can kind of understand that sort of thing. Like if they had just told me, you've said some like kind of crazy, controversial things in the past, it's just better for both of us if we didn't, work together. I could understand that, but they went a step further and accused me of racism, sexism, misogyny. Like I dress up as characters, like I literally wear wigs and do different characters, and I like enact scenes of like racism and misogyny where like it's one redneck character I have, like he's really mean to his wife, but that's not actually sexism. So
And
like I can only
you can even
figure.
get away with doing blackface too. You've got your bases covered.
Yeah. I don't know if I've, actually I have done blackface. I've done blackface and whiteface.
I respect that.
So
In light of the goal to keep all things equal. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with like getting mad, threatening to kill. I don't know if you know, I got banned from Twitch. I said I wanted the entire state to be bombed out of existence. And Israel's never even done anything to me, mind you. This person, threatened your livelihood. So I have, I completely understand that. In regards to the intersectionality stuff, because I don't know, I know I've actually seen some of your videos. I know that you've done like the natty or not shit. Obviously, you're vegan. I've seen your vegan debate. I saw your debate with Destiny. Um,
yeah.
I thought that one was pretty good. In the sense that like I I mean, it was an interesting debate, if nothing else.
It's okay to kill tribes people.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, yeah, those poor North Sentinelese.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You know, his position on it is like so far out from like conventional normative ethics that it's really, really difficult. But,
Yeah.
I don't know if like I'm gonna go through your videos and find like 8 months in your like collab with Ben Shapiro to like trigger the trans women or something. Probably not.
I fucking hate all those people, dude. Like you'll find plenty of videos and live streams I've done where I just tear Ben Shapiro and Crowder and shit a new asshole,
All right.
particularly around abortion.
Hell
But
yeah. Oh,
like
just making sure.
what's especially strange is like I'm not left wing or right wing. Like I wouldn't really like. I guess if I had to say, I'm more center. But I don't really care about the left wing, right wing thing. Like I just care more about policies. And again, I'm pretty much in favor of a lot of progressive policies. So it's kind of strange how when I've debated people like defending women's rights to vote, I've like debated crazy far right wingers on immigration. Like I've defended abortion abortion rights. Like I'm obviously pro-choice. Like, and then they accuse me of racism, sexism, misogyny, and all this horseshit.
The whole gift package. I mean, yeah, let's hit it the fuck up. I mean, I have no idea why they would make those accusations in a bubble or anything, but
well,
oh, sorry.
I can tell you why. It's because I disagree with intersectionality. I've been outspoken about that for a while, and again, like people accuse me, like left wingers, they accuse me of straw manning intersectionality, but the reason I really care about intersectionality is just because I see it kind of infecting the vegan movement. And one of the really bad things with the intersectional culture is just that, like, if you disagree with them on anything, they just try to cancel you. So that's why I've like gotten into these intersectionalist discussions and shit. But like you said you wanted to talk about intersectionality and everything, so
Yeah, I
I'm up
feel
to
like I'm
talk.
pretty qualified to talk about it because I have a sociology degree. And nowadays, intersectionality is more or less the bedrock of sociological critical theory. If you go to school and you learn like about sociological theory, it's almost always being done through the lens of intersectionality. I've never heard a person say that they're in favor of anti-racism, abortion rights, women's liberation, all of the components of progressive thought, but then turn around and say they're not in favor of the sort of binding theory that unifies them into like a collective critical mass. So that's interesting to me. Let's talk about it. I guess the main thrust of intersectionality, I guess, is the idea that the power structures that lead to the oppression of group A along a given axis, let's say race or gender or what have you, is usually synchronous with other power structures which exist to oppress other marginalized communities. So, for example, like women get shit on, in a variety of ways, disproportionate, less representation, what have you. And that's bad. And being gay, usually nets you some added level of stress. Less so now in more progressive areas, but it's definitely still a thing. But being a gay woman means you now have this. There are specific problems at the interstice between these two axes. Like a gay woman, like a lesbian woman, would deal with particular problems, like, for example, like getting called like a dyke or a butcher, what have you, or being chastised for not living up to the roles associated with femininity, like bearing a child or like taking care of a strong man. And those things exist at that point and that point only, and they can only exist because there are dual power structures that kind of overlap at that section. You know what I mean?
Okay, so when I debated this woman, I think her name was Christina. I'm really bad with remembering names, but she kind of explained it in a
Taking care
different
of a
way.
strong man.
She was explaining it in a way where she was suggesting these lines of oppression, they're interrelated, and if you take down one line of oppression, it's basically like it's basically like this web where if you untangle one web, it like the whole web kind of breaks down. The way you're explaining it is a bit different, where you're saying there are different forms of oppression like sexism and homophobia, and they can intersect each other, and people can deal with two forms of oppression at the same time.
Yeah,
So
and that they sort of
okay.
reflect off one another. There's this discursive element between those two axes, which leads to a specific a juncture that leads to specific problems for the people who occupy that space.
Okay. That explanation makes a lot more sense to me. Now, I will say personally that most of the intersectionalists I've dealt with, they don't really use that sort of explanation to define intersectionality.
I've found that there are a lot of people online, and this is, I'm not trying to sound like condescending to them or anything like that,
Yeah.
but I have found that there are a lot of people online who are progressive, and it's good that they're progressive, but they they express their political views by misappropriating academic terminology, and it can make it really difficult to clear up what exactly anyone means when you start having people talk about like the discursive realities and talk about like intersectionality, critical theory, and you have no idea if they're using the academic definition or if they just heard it and it sounded woke, so they started like throwing it out there, as aggressively as they could.
I'm sure there are tons of those people, and I'm sure I've met tons of those people. The way you describe intersectionality makes a lot more sense to me because, just to clarify, you're not saying that these different forms of oppression, they're somehow interrelated to each other, where if you got rid of one, the other will like kind of collapse.
I think actually I would take the opposite position. I would say that if you got rid of one without getting rid of the other, that other one that still exists would seek to fill in the holes that were left through the absence of the axis of oppression you just removed. Do you mind if I throw another example out there?
Sure.
Like for you, you just clarify, like I don't fuck up. Like you're black, right?
Well, half black, I guess.
Right. I don't know if you're like Latin or something. I don't fucking. But this is, I don't know if it's ever happened to you. I've been told this happens fairly frequently, at least in my experience. It makes sense intuitively. Like a lot of fucking black guys, especially big ones, you're a pretty big boy, often get this like uneasy feeling in public that that other people are like nervous to be around them, like particularly like white women, because and you don't know like is it because I'm like a big guy or is it because I'm black and they're kind of like tetchy about that, and it's this weird intersection because being a guy isn't enough there. It's not enough to just be a guy to elicit that reaction, and also not to be black because black women don't get treated that way. It's this the point between the two, and if you took away one of those axes, if you could suddenly like remove sexism from the equation, like there was perfect parity between the sexes, genders, complete equality, racism would still kind of fill in that gap, and you'd be experiencing the same problem because you failed to substantively address the entirety of the problem. You've only gotten rid of one leg of the chair. The chair's still over you,
Okay, I see what you're saying.
That's the gist of it, at least. I
Right.
It's, a little while out of school, but I think intersectionality is a really, really valuable way of sort of approaching and dealing with social issues, because without it, you kind of get left in this like, oh, well, are they being treated like shit because of this or this? Well, they can't be getting treated like shit because they're black. They're rich. Rich people have privilege. Okay, well, black people don't. And it gets all really stupid and oppression Olympicsy unless you find a way to sort of take into account all the different disparate threads.
Okay. Yeah, I can agree with that. Now, what was also interesting to me, like there are several levels to the debate I had about intersectionality before. We were discussing like whether or not the concept of intersectionality is valid. Again, like the debate went in a different direction because of the way she explained it. I don't see any sort of direct interaction between these different forms of oppression. Like I don't see how racism and sexism are directly interrelated to each other, but I can see how, yeah, somebody can experience sexism and racism at the same time. Like if you're a black woman. Now there was another level to it with how we deal with activism, and it's activism in the vegan community. Like, how would intersectionality help vegan activism specifically?
I've had I'm not going to lie. Listen, I'm not a vegan, but I probably agree with almost every normative claim you would make about veganism. Genocide being perpetuated, untold lives lost, we need to destroy the meat industry. I would agree with those prescriptions. I've had really weird interactions with the vegan community. I feel like half of the ones I've talked to have been some flavor of eco-fascist, where, where they're really, really concerned about animals, but then they'll like turn around and say like, oh yeah, fucking Negroes, that kind of thing, or like fucking feminism. So I don't really know what's going on right now in the vegan community. I would hope though that most vegans would take an intersectional approach to how they deal with social justice, because animal rights is unquestionably a form of social justice. Because if through no other lens, it's very difficult to deal with meat eating substantively without also criticizing capitalism. And that is a form of intersectionality, the class oriented justice around critiquing capitalism and the animal rights activism associated with like shutting down meat plants and not pumping them full of hormones and such. So I think that would be like a really strong interaction there. I guess it's possible and also philosophically consistent to love animals but also fucking hate people and not really care about them. I don't know why you'd take that position, but I guess it's not technically contradictory.
Okay. Yeah, this is something I discussed before too. Like, I don't necessarily see how capitalism would be a negative for animal rights. If you look at communist countries like China, they have some of the worst animal rights laws imaginable. These developed capitalist societies, we're the ones coming out with the most up-to-date animal rights laws. We're going to eventually just phase out animal agriculture entirely just because of technological advancement.
Oh, I should hope so. I mean, listen, we're all waiting on that lab grown meat. I don't know about how quickly that transition is going to come, though. I mean, there are like hundreds of billions of dollars invested in meat agriculture in this country, aren't there? Like, that's a pretty big hole to dig out of.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's quite a lot.
I think the interaction. All right, do you mind if I go full fucking revolutionary on you for a second?
Yeah, sure.
The argument that I would make for the intersection is that, generally speaking, if you want to affect positive change in an economic sense, and that's what the vegans want to do because it's a meat industry, like it's not it's all tied to money. So if you want to affect positive change in that respect, the best way to do so is to make sure that your economic system is beholden to the interests of its constituents. You want democracy. And while no matter how popular veganism might get with the population, or not just veganism, but maybe just less meat eating or being more critical of meat eating, no matter where the general population lies, the people who are actually in charge of opening and running and maintaining and funding those meat facilities, those meat agriculture plants, will never, ever budge unless it is in their material interest to do so. Their goal is to maximize those profits. Whereas in a socialist system, you eliminate the bourgeois class. And while there absolutely still can be animal mistreatment and what have you, and I could rant for ages about the problems with the USSR and the People's Republic of China, at the end of the day, making the economic superstructures of a society beholden to the interests of its people makes it more likely that positive progressive change can be made through those systems.
I see what you're saying.
That's the argument that I would make, but you can get lost in the weeds real quick with that one.
So I would agree with you there that not having a profit motive would make democratic decisions a little easier, especially when you don't have like lobbying interest groups and shit. Like there's a huge meat lobby and dairy and egg lobby in the U.S. That doesn't necessarily that doesn't necessarily mean that capitalism is interwoven into this social justice movement of veganism. It still doesn't make sense to me to kind of conflate veganism with anti-capitalism. because again, you can have the same sort of issue even in socialist economies.
You absolutely can, but in much in the same way that you can do one or do the other, but and do both of them at the same time, but it's not necessarily needed to do so. I would make the same argument in regards to fighting racism and sexism simultaneously. That while dealing with one of these issues does not necessarily require you deal with the other, it becomes easier to do so if you're framing it through a perspective that sort of holistically considers the elements involved. I will say, though, veganism is probably more distanced from intersectionality than any other social rights movement, if for no other reason than because it's holistic in that it only it's already dealing with animals in every way there is to deal with animals. Whereas with humans, like racism and sexism are both dealing. It gets much more specified.
Sure, I get what you're saying. So you're saying it's kind of more broad, where you're dealing with like literally just the removal of fundamental rights. Like veganism would technically involve things like sexism and speciesism, which is like a fairly similar to racism. It's a more broad topic that doesn't really require intersectionality.
Yeah, and you can, and also, like, to make it analogous, like the level of specificity that you would see in veganism if it treated animals the same way that broader intersectional movements treated humans, you would see there would be like the social movement to get animals better living accommodations, and the social movement to get them better like dietary accommodations, and the social movement to keep them from being slaughtered, and like all three of them, and they'd all have different names, and probably people who would argue with one another, and then someone would come up and say, hey, what if we just called it animal rights? And we sort of holistically drove them together into this one. And we could do the same thing with humans, human rights. And we kind of do. Human rights does include things like fighting against racism and sexism. Though I have to admit, and I guess this is where I pose a question at you, is your interest in intersectionality limited entirely to the utility it could pose to vegans?
Like, I care about a number of issues. It's not that I only care about animals. I do care about human issues as well. But my primary area of focus is veganism. So, if intersectionality is completely unnecessary to promote veganism, and it seems to be like just a cancer on the movement, where these intersectionalists are infiltrating these organizations, they're getting people deplatformed, blacklisted, and just the whole general discourse is just going to shit. So yeah, I wouldn't really.
To what extent is that happening?
Okay,
I have to take your word for it. I
yeah.
had meat earlier today. I am ostracized from that converse.
So I'd kind of equate it to what happened with Atheism Plus a while ago. That whole thing where they tried to make. Yeah, so before you had activists like Thunderfoot, TJ, and they were just focusing on atheism, and occasionally they'd break into slightly different topics. TJ especially, he obviously talks about like women's rights and some other social justice issues, but primarily focuses on atheism. Well, with the Atheism Plus thing, there was that big atheist convention. It was totally washed out by all of these like feminist, anti-capitalist, anti-racist, just
I was in
political activists. Yeah. Okay. Well,
I was following all of that at the time. Yeah.
Well, that's okay. Well, you know what? Like, if all those things matter to you, it makes sense. But if atheism matters to you, if promoting atheism matters to you, and those other things you don't really care about, not that they're not important, but you don't really care about it, then atheism falls to the wayside. And that's kind of what I'm seeing with veganism.
I think
I was just for example, I was just at there was a friggin' woman on the Toronto Vegetarian Association. Despite the name, it's actually a vegan organization, but they happen to have a vegetarian woman who was a board member on this vegan organization. And she actually called herself an intersectionalist, and she explicitly stated we should treat animals the way we treat people. Well, she's vegetarian, so she eats dairy and eggs. So I just called her out for it and said, like, hey, if you're saying you're an intersectionalist, you care about all these intersecting lines of oppression, we should treat animals the way we treat people, then why are you promoting rape, torture, and murder of cows and chickens? And then after I did a video about this, after that video came out, all of these fucking intersectionalists were saying I did a bad thing because I criticized a woman, and they also like body shamed me apparently because I'm a large person. I have to be more polite and calm because I might frighten someone.
Hey, that's what we're talking about, baby. I bet you
Yeah.
if you were white, you wouldn't have gotten that shit, huh? Damn,
Maybe.
they're proving their
I
own
don't know.
point.
I'm not sure.
I
But
don't know.
that's
I'm
another
making
thing
shit up.
too. Like, there's a lot of fucking intersectionalists who are the most like extreme racists I've ever encountered.
Well,
like
okay,
that
I
Darren
mean,
Chang asshole.
I can't step up the bat for that shit. I mean, if you're
Yeah.
intersectional and then you're race, like okay, like fuck you. I have to touch on what you said earlier, the atheism plus thing. The speaking from the other side of that fence with that discussion. The reason why I was so sort of encanced with atheism plus and all of the sort of intersectional elements of it that moved in was because it felt like for a large period of time, all of the atheist elements on YouTube, the atheist community, were basically just as smug and chauvinistic and like blind to hierarchy as the Christians they were replacing. They were just smugger about it because they were atheists and therefore correct. And the atheism plus thing was replacing their sort of smarmy fedora tipping atheism with a more holistic humanistic atheism that recognizing atheism is not only like a gotcha that you can get to like own your uncle at family time, but also an elevating force through which we can liberate people from the oppressive elements of religion. So I was very happy to see that atheism plus stuff like grow at the time. It's stalled since. So I feel like there isn't really. I mean, nowadays, if you say like you're an atheist online, you'll get mocked for it because it's like so cliche. You know, people will make like the fedora jokes and the enlightened the well, the copy pasta. Like the enlightened. In this
Yeah.
moment, I am enlightened, not because of some phony god, but you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever the case is, like I was in favor of that because I saw and I still see atheism not for something of its own right, but also as a vehicle by which human lives can be improved. And it didn't feel like it was really living up to that purpose. You know?
Sure. Okay, I can understand that, but like, do you know any big names in the movement, the atheist movement, who were kind of like as bad as the Christians they were criticizing?
I mean, Thunderfoot's like Anita Sarkeesian like Gamergate fetish shit was pretty bad. Richard Dawkins is a huge cunt.
What did he do?
I'm sorry?
What did he do?
Oh,
I
he's
know
just-
there was that child pedophile thing.
He's just a smug dick. I'd have to go back through it. Oh yeah, Computing Forever. Oh, Sam Harris. Sam Harris is basically a fascist, so that one's pretty.
Really? What
I
makes
think
him a fascist?
amazing. I mean, I listen. I love calling people fascists. Amazing Atheist, I think, is more left leaning these days. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, Dawkins. Jordan, what do you mean Jordan Peterson, guys? Jordan Peterson's a conservative Christian. Yeah. Oh yeah. Dawkins is speaking at an anti-SJW evangelical conference, apparently. Which is interesting.
Okay,
It just
is he
felt
not-
like, oh, sorry.
Like, is he not just kind of fed up with the weird social justice warrior cancel culture? Kind of like, isn't that just it though?
I mean, I'm
Like-
pretty critical of the worst elements of the left. I'm currently like experiencing the blowback from my most recent attempt to criticize the left. But a lot of these people, no, they just act like reactionaries. They don't act meaningfully very much different from like 2014 YouTube, where the entirety of political discourse could be boiled down to who does and does not get offended by me like talking about black people as though they're monkeys, when they riot in Baltimore or Portland or what have you. It feels like a huge regression in discourse. And a lot of the people who were touted for their intelligence because they write these manifestos on atheism and anti-Christianity, when they try and talk about other social issues, they just embarrass themselves. But they get taken seriously because not everyone can really discern between a good and a bad idea in a field they're not that familiar with.
Right. Like I don't really know if this is such a huge issue in the vegan community. I mean, the majority of vegans are women, and they tend to be left leaning. Although I
Fucking
have
femboys.
seen sort of a bit of a shift recently, which is kind of weird, where I've seen more like really far right vegans. There's that crazy dude. He's kind of had this opinion for a long time, though. John Rose. I don't know if you know of him.
I think I've heard that
He's
name.
he's a raw vegan dude, and he believes that the Holocaust never happened. He's a Hitler supporter. He's also a big fan of Henry Ford. The dude's nuts. And I have a video clip of this. He said Hitler was pretty nice to the Jews after what the Jews did to Hitler. Fucking insane.
I mean, again, that's an argument for intersectionality and veganism right there, though, isn't it?
Like, I mean, do we really need intersectionality to point out that these people are fucking insane?
I mean, a lot of the people on YouTube who started out being just like anti-SJW, anti like Tumblr cringe feminazi are now basically Nazis. So I feel like we jumped down that rabbit hole really quickly. Like, but I don't know how much you engage with the sphere of things, but like the line from being like a Thunderfoot Sargon of Akkad fan 4 years ago to being a James Alsop, Nick Fuentes, Red Ice TV fan today is like really short. I feel like once your politics are defined by being anti-SJW, it's only a matter of time before you find yourself agreeing with every other community that's also anti-SJW, many of whom are Nazis, because Nazis don't like social justice that much.
I don't know exactly how true that is. I've seen some research on YouTube's algorithm. It seems that people tend to actually gravitate more towards the center or left from the right wing than be radicalized towards the right wing. So I've seen some data that kind of
before I could.
Yeah, like Tim Pool did a few videos on this. I don't particularly like the guy, but he did some videos on that where there was some good research done where it seems that there's more radicalization towards the left and the right wing tends to travel more towards the center or the left.
I mean, the only response I have is that it's Tim Pool, but I'd have to look at the data.
I don't like him either. I don't like him either. But yeah,
what do you think he has under the beanie?
Just a bald head.
You really think you don't think it's some like Ed and Eddie shit, like with Double D, like it's the season finale, you know, the final Tim Pool episode, someone yanks it off?
I'm pretty sure it's just a weird bald head. I've seen it before. There's like a video clip online where he has like a really weird bald head.
Damn.
On top of that, I think there's just a financial incentive for some of these anti-SJW channels to go more towards the like really far right wing. I've seen that with No Bullshit for sure, where that dude has no fucking principles whatsoever.
He is actually a neo-Nazi, by the way. He tends to be quiet about it, but like full on like Holocaust deny.
Does he actually believe that, or is he just saying it?
It was in DMs. He was responding to DMs asking about the Jewish question and saying, funny little parallel, saying like, hey, do you think there's a reason why they got kicked out of 139 countries in Europe? Makes you think. After what they did to Hitler. He's a full-on neo-Nazi. And he has like 2/3 of a million subs. It's pretty wild.
The thing with him is, it just seems like I've seen the progression, like, and I've seen some private conversations he's had too. Not that particular one, but it just seems like he has this slightly more private opinion of things when it comes to talking to people who support him. Mm-hmm. But then on his YouTube channel, when he's speaking to a broader audience, he's less like totally insane. And I think he's made that progression where he used to just be an anti-SJW and he went into the far right just because they're a tighter community of people who will financially support him. And I know at one point he was having a lot of issues with his YouTube channel, like losing subs, losing views. So I think that's the whole reason. And I've seen the same thing with fucking Stefan Molyneux. The guy's also totally become... Like, he made a fucking post on Twitter, like, where he was trying to absolve white people of like the crimes they committed, like with slavery. I think he said exactly that slavery is like the drug trade.
Oh, I remember. This is
Black
my favorite
people,
one. Yes.
Yeah, black people are the dealers, white people are the users. And
Who's
he was
worse?
basically trying.
Yeah, who's worse, the
Yeah,
dealer or
it's
the
like,
user?
what the fuck?
Imagine blinking and going on Twitter and seeing somebody who makes like $200,000 a year off of Patreon or whatever, however the fuck he funds his podcast, and they're saying that the real victims of the transatlantic slave trade were the white people. That's
It's
a good ass
fucked.
meme right there.
Yeah, it's fucked. So, and I've seen him, like, I've followed him loosely for like a while. I used to watch him a fair bit more like years ago when he wasn't just totally out of his mind. But I've seen that gradual progression. Then when I saw him, like, you know, being just promoting this insane racist bullcrap, I just stopped watching him entirely. But
that's what I'm
I think
worried
there's
about
just
mostly. I think that's what a lot of people are worried about. Because I don't want to like paint with broad brushes here. There are a lot of people who are like kind of anti SJW, and they just like wake up or whatever and like, oh, the feminazis are at it again, and they go to sleep and they live good lives, and they're generally good, decent, moral people. But a lot of these people, I feel like, are just on a fucking gravy train to fascism, you know? And you don't know who's going to end up where, so the best thing you can do is make every community resistant to those kind of impacts. And I think that might be what they were doing with those vegan conferences. Not in regards to booting you out, I have no idea what the fuck they did that. But in terms of like making it more broadly intersectional, it might be a fear, and maybe a substantiated one, that if they don't do that, you could like blink and 3-4 years later find yourself in the company of like eco-fascist vegan movements that are like, hey, we gotta save the animals. And you know who's responsible for killing those animals? That's right, it's the fucking Jews. And they don't want that, so they're just doing what they think will work best at preventing that.
I really doubt that. Like, again, I think that's this transition from anti-SJW to like far right racist. I think that's more of a risk for people who have something to gain from it, like YouTubers who actually make a living. And you know, you can very obviously see supporting these far right racist groups does have a financial benefit. They will support you with money.
Oh yeah, they're desperate. They'll toss 90% of their income at you, anything to have them be told that the white race will rise again. I don't know. I guess it really depends on how much you believe radicalization is a threat. In my experience, and this is also literally because it's literally my job to do this. Like, this is more so than most left-leaning channels. I deal with radicalization and trying to like de-radicalize people in the center or on the right. I see like a lot of people when I go into those poll threads, or when I go into Nick Fuentes' stream, every once in a while Nick Fuentes will be like, and what brought you here, boys? What was your red pill? And then like the chat will flood with a wave of like Sargon of Akkad's, the Quarterings, you know, and all of the people who, innocuous in some lights, but to some people that was the first step down a road that led them to a death cult. And that's pretty fucking yikesy. And
well, I have two things to say there. I think there was a good point made by a left-wing journalist where she was making the point that there's been a lot of gamers who've gone more in the right-wing direction, and it's just because the right is more friendly to them, whereas the left accuses them of fucking everything. And I see that same thing happening in veganism, and that might be why I'm seeing more like vegans going to the far right, like this crazy fucking asshole Jack Green. He like, I did a live stream with him where I was debating Bering, and he used to be okay, and then he just went full Nazi, and he's a Hitler supporter, denies the Holocaust and everything.
Isn't it wild that people like that exist today? I feel like 3 or 4 years ago, like this actually wasn't a thing, you know?
Sort of like flat Earth.
Yeah,
but
it all kind of came back, didn't it?
But
and anti-vaxxers.
I think that's one of the reasons why you're seeing more of it. It's just that there's some crazy leftists who, you know, like, I'm not saying all people on the left wing, all intersectionalists are like this, but the people who are super loud, obnoxious, annoying, accuse you of everything, they're going to push you away from the left wing. And then when you start looking at videos like Sargon of Akkad making fun of SJWs, you're like, oh, finally, somebody who's listening to me. And then, you know, it's easier to go down that rabbit hole where you find, you know, pro-Nazi Hitler supporters who won't judge you who are also against these SJWs.
Dude, I
And
completely agree with you. By the
well,
way,
and look, I'm seeing that in the vegan movement as well. That guy Darren Chang, who was responsible for getting me kicked off that speaking event. I've had multiple people contact me saying that the dude is a crazy racist who hates white people. He used to live over in Vancouver, and when he was in the vegan activist scene there, he'd constantly complain about white people, how they're trash, they're the devil. I've seen plenty of vegan activists on like Twitter complain about there not being enough representation of black women or minorities, and they complain about people like Earthling Ed, Joey Carbstrong, who are like light or white skinned. And I think that's probably part of the
I want
problem.
to disavow.
With,
by the way, I'd like it known to the public. I disavow
sure.
hating white people. I by the way, I agree with your assessment here. This is something that I've had difficulty with when talking to other left-leaning people. So because there's a balancing act here, right? Sometimes when people say, "Oh my God, the left with its cancel culture too exclusionary," they're literally like masked Nazis who are just trying to stir shit, or they're people who are mad that like left-leaning people don't like it when you go into their spaces and like call black people chimps. And I think those complaints can be safely discarded. But I do agree like 100% with every fiber of my being that the left has an issue with accommodation, that it would be much easier for us to assert ourselves in these spaces, not like taking them over, but to like express like, hey, maybe we could do things this way, or we should be more considerate of this or that. It would be much easier to do that if we were willing to, with some degree of partiality, listen to people's concerns and hear them out and make an effort to bring them into the fold rather than excluding anyone who doesn't meet like an arbitrary purity test standard. I think that's really toxic, and I think that it whittles our numbers and makes the people who might have been on our side dislike us otherwise, because we ask so much more of them than reactionaries would,
Well, for sure. And I actually discussed this as well. I think there's a problem with the interpretation of intersectionality, where the interpretation that I've seen from these intersectional activists is they believe if you do not if you commit some sort of like microaggression, or you do something that they find offensive to one group, like when I dress up as a redneck and I make some sexist jokes because like that's the character, they assume that if they allow that to happen, they like accept that behavior. They're also going to accept racism, all forms of bigotry, along with that like little microaggression I created, because they believe all of these things are directly interwoven somehow, and if they don't attack even the most minor of things, they're going to basically be supporting all forms of bigotry, no matter how big or small. And I think that creates that sort of purity mindset.
Yeah, I mean, I get a lot of this. I don't know if you're at all familiar with my content, or if you just saw someone like mention, or you'd heard my name before. But I make like pretty edgy jokes pretty often, and I'm pretty far left. I'm hiding my power level slightly. I'm like an anarchist, but in spite of that, I make edgy jokes. I make jokes about women. I make jokes about like people of all sorts, and I try to keep them on the positive side. But sometimes folks in the left do make it difficult for me to do my job, because I feel like they're more interested in tackling the aesthetics of bigotry than they are the substance. Right. It's really
I
easy.
Absolutely agree with that.
Yeah. Like, it's really easy to like see a YouTuber and like, oh, they called someone a bitch or a cunt. Like, oh shit, those are sex words. And to go after that, because it's very visible and very obvious. But dealing with the undercurrents, or like the more pernicious elements of bigotry that are usually the ones that lead to much more harm in the long term, that is a lot harder. And if you get the two confused, you get in unfortunate situations where you can be anti-racism and kick out people of an event because one time they made some mild joke about like black people or race relations or something, like some SNL tier shit. But
Yeah.
you can let people in who unironically say shit like they hate white people, because the aesthetics of saying you hate white people, even though it may belie substantial underlying issues with one's thought process, do not overlap with the aesthetics of genuine white supremacy. It's a big conflation, and it makes a lot of people unhappy. And I agree, it's a serious problem.
Yeah, Slavoj Zizek. He don't know if I'm pronouncing his name
Wait. Can you
properly.
pronounce? Wait, can you say that name again for me?
Slavoj Zizek.
All right, all right.
Is that close enough? Anyway,
Yeah, no doubt.
I've seen him kind of make the same sentiment where he it was kind of interesting. He thinks this PC culture, it actually promotes, like, it actually makes it harder to fight against these forms of oppression, like this politically correct, being nice to everybody and nobody can make any jokes. It actually makes it more difficult to point out and fight these different forms of oppression.
Did you see that video of his?
On the Big Think.
Was it Vox or Vice or I don't know who ran the segment or anything, or was it Russia Today? But yeah, he did like the segment that we saw, and he talked about how I think he talked about it in relation to capitalism also, and he was saying stuff like it's more difficult. The more pernicious elements of the class dynamic are obfuscated. You say they are your family, not your coworkers, and that sort of thing. Not your boss, but like your team leader, that kind of shit. Yeah, I agree. Language is a vehicle for thought. It's not the thought itself. In many cases, it needs to be viewed a little bit more analytically than some people are willing to do so.
For sure. So like, what's your general opinion from like the goings on? Do you think intersectionality has really any meaningful place in vegan activism specifically?
I mean, I'm biased because I do what I do,
Yeah.
I would want to see like far left activism like seep into every corner of the planet if I could, because that's what I want. Probably in the same way that you would want to see animal cruelty abolished from that would lead to very substantial changes like systemically, societally. I would like to do the same for what I consider to be human rights. I think my only caveat here is that I would want it to be done to the extent that it encourages thoughtful mindedness amidst the people who are engaging in that action, veganism, intersectionality, and encourages people to get on board with both. The ideal goal would be, hey, left-leaning people who are big on intersectionality, you should probably include veganism as part of this. Like, if you value sapient life, then you should value veganism, because it is the tool through which we liberate frankly, an oppressed class of existence. And likewise, hey, vegans, if you're interested in the well-being of animals, it should follow then naturally the big brainedest animal of them all, you should consider ways in which we can, and so on and so forth. As long as that interaction is like non-toxic, I'm 100% in favor of it.
I'd agree with that, but it, like, to be as non-biased as possible, like, you did touch upon the point that veganism is pretty broad. It kind of does touch upon topics like, not technically racism, but speciesism, sexism, basic rights being taken away. Do you think just for promoting veganism specifically, intersectionality has any real role?
Yeah, I think so. Big points that I could say would be that so a lot of people don't view it this way, but global warming is largely a class issue. It's generally the poor who suffer the most from it. Same with pollution, for example. There have been studies showing that the poor and people of color are disproportionately affected by pollution because they tend to be crowded into like inner city urban areas that suffer the most smog. And meat consumption contributes like astronomically to both of those things, pollution and to carbon emissions. I think that disproportionately affects the poor and people of color by way of the two being proxy for one another. People of color tend to be poorer. And I think you can make really good arguments in favor of veganism on that basis alone. Even if you didn't give a fuck about the animals, you could be like, hey, we have this industry that, you know, leave aside the ethics of the industry itself, contributes to climate change in a way that will disproportionately hamper this group and that group, and the pollution it emits disproportionately affects these people. And then you can, if you wanted to get into capitalism, you could talk about how the meat industry has been responsible for some ludicrously shady shit that's going on in the American legislature, not even to fucking count the other countries' legislators. I mean, I don't know, I'm an American, the only country that actually exists, all the other ones are fake. I think that if you really dig into it, there are a lot of there are many ways in which the world and the people in it would like systemically benefit from like the end to factory farming, an end to meat eating, at least for now, like before we get high-tech future lab-grown meat. And I could make arguments for it on the basis of that. Same way a lot of people who don't care about the planet will argue against global warming, not to save the planet, but rather to save us because we live on it, you know?
Sure, I'd agree with that. Usually no, it's cool. Like I've made arguments like that when trying to convince feminists to go vegan, and the thing is, I don't know if it's the way I'm seeing like intersectionalism being incorporated into vegan activism. It seems like it's not actually meant to convince, it's not being used to target a certain section of the population that could actually benefit from this sort of knowledge. It's just it's as if, you know, if you were going to protest a slaughterhouse and you held up feminism signs, it's basically like that. They bring up topics that are totally unrelated, and it just makes it confusing for people on the outside who are watching this.
I wouldn't agree with that, by the way. I think that when you dilute issues to that extent, things get like, it just gets harder to advocate. Like you start showing up at like fucking Black Lives Matter rallies with like the fucking feminist like pussy hat thing. I don't know. It seems like you're mixing stuff up a little bit. I will say this though, and I think that this is like the hard point to bring in it. At the end of the day, coalition building is what wins both of us the day. I mean, someone very interested in lefty politics, very much want everyone on board with my way of thinking. And likewise with you, with veganism. I mean, that's how we win, right? And the best way to do so is to ensure that there is the greatest degree of coalition building made possible between all groups with common interests. And it is easy to make the vegan argument to progressive people, because progressive people are already in many cases willing to make sacrifices to their life to ensure the betterment, the well-being of others. And I think vice versa for many vegans. They're already making that sacrifice. A little bit of conscientiousness about society tends to come along with it. By implementing the two, veganism into intersectional circles and intersectionalism into vegan circles, you coalition build, you demonstrate a degree of synchronicity between the two groups, and that makes both of them much stronger. We could stand to benefit quite a bit from shared interests.
The only thing that, like, again, I agree, cooperating with different political groups is advantageous. It's just that like I've been seeing this happening where veganism is, it seemed like at least people's perception of it, it's becoming more and more of a left-wing thing. And I don't like the idea of having veganism get recognized as a left-wing issue. I'd like people, even Nazis, I'd like it if Nazis were to go vegan, you know what I mean? Obviously, I'd prefer them not to be Nazis, but, you know, people even more, even just, you know, moderate right-wingers, I'd like to be able to see them go vegan. And I'm seeing people just not be interested in veganism because it's being conflated with crazy far left-wing social justice, intersectional feminists who are in support of all the crap that people hate, like deplatforming.
Well, to be fair, people have been saying that about vegans for decades, and that's because veganism has always been fairly left leaning. Sometimes it's leaned more into the traditionally leftist anti capitalist, but more recently it's been more of a progressive thing. For the reasons I said before, I think there is a shared interest here. I think that while there will be eco-fascists who jump in on this, and there will probably be some vegan conservatives, veganism is already intrinsically a component of progressive thought because you are, rather than just accepting this natural hierarchy between you and animals where you reign supreme and may do what you wish, you are instead saying, dismantle the hierarchy, let them live well. And I think that's a fundamentally left-leaning take. I think that veganism is not, if not intrinsically, but at the very least heavily associated with leftism. And for that reason, I think embracing that union, maybe finding ways to clean up the optics a little bit, I think it's a better way forward than trying to pretend that veganism, with all of its ties to leftism historically, is this completely apolitical, neutral thing when it's already so tied to the welfare of others, anti-pollution, and in some cases, anti-capitalism.
I don't know if I totally agree with that. There are definitely some aspects of veganism that I think even people on the right would appreciate, like protection of life. There's definitely a lot of religious Christians. I mean, there's fucking Adventists who, in their religion, they're not allowed to eat meat. So, these ideas, thou shalt not kill, love thy neighbor, treat others the way you'd want to be treated. There's also, passages in the Bible where, God commands, like it's pretty clear that, in the Bible, God wanted people to just eat plants. So I've made those arguments when talking to, people who are on the right wing, especially religious. So
Janus,
I don't know if
maybe. I don't know.
Janus.
A lot of
Sikh, Jains, yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah, like those folks, sure. A lot of fundamental Christians are kind of responsible for the shit state the world's in because they believe the rapture is coming and that God gave them dominion over the earth as a lion would over the savannah, right? So we can do whatever we will to the earth. It's all fine. Jesus is going to show us.
There's different. I can't remember. There's a version that says dominion. There's another version that says something else. But you could interpret dominion as like taking care of, not just controlling outright. As if you were just some sort of slave master.
You could. I mean? Just there's such a union right now between fundamental Christians, Republicans, and the big businesses that have bought their politicians. Don't get me wrong; it's a valid argument. Like if one cared about the Bible, American Christians, I don't think they
sure.
Often.
Well, honestly, even non-religious people just. People who don't identify with any sort of religious ideology who are still right-wing, most people just like animals. Most people don't want to see animals get hurt, and I don't think most people would kill and eat an animal themselves. So I think veganism is a thing that pretty much everyone can agree with, even if they are on the right or left wing.
Well, again, but many of them don't.
Well, I understand. I do agree with you that there are cultural trends where people who tend to be more leaning, more progressive, they have a higher likelihood to go vegan. It's a number of reasons. There's factors like, just being more intelligent, caring about things, being more responsible. But I think veganism is for everyone, and especially seeing as how just the movement right now is being poisoned by these insane people, these insane intersectionalists. I don't like it being conflated with just the left wing.
I mean,
I'd rather it be seen as just something that everyone can agree with, that, yeah, killing animals is wrong. And whether you're on the right or left wing, it's just something we can agree on. Like child rape, I'm sure everyone on the left and right can agree, that's horrible.
I've talked to some folks from the right who might disagree with your take on that.
Yeah.
I think I'm more familiar with the broader left movement, and you're more familiar with the broader vegan movement. So both of us are, at least in regards to our personal experiences, going to talk past each other a little bit. I think there's enough of a union between the interests of left-leaning people in the interests of vegans, as demonstrated, and you just said, generally speaking, if you're vegan, you're more likely to be left-leaning than if you're not vegan, if you're omnivoric. I think there's enough of a union there that some kind of synchronicity should be built to capitalize on an existing union, to bolster the strength of both. But I do agree with you. Veganism shouldn't be considered like just for the left. Obviously, if there are like event masters, event coordinators who for vegan movements who are losing their shit and acting all cringe like about white people and getting too heated over a joke or two in a YouTube video, I think that people like this probably need to consider their senses a bit, take hold of their faculties, maybe be let go of the positions of power they hold. I would like to see the leftism and veganism like unity branch be one based on mutual collaborative effort and a desire to change both groups for the better, to make more left-leaning people vegan, which I think is needed, and more vegan people left-leaning, which I also think is needed. My chat's always on my ass for not being vegan, so that's my.
Yeah, maybe we could have another debate later on.
I would. I would
one
agree with
Ask Yourself, right?
I did, yeah. I would agree with every prescriptive statement that you would make. The only thing that I would say in response, and this is sort of where I came at the gap too with Ask Yourself, is I believe that people shouldn't be held responsible for their consumptive decision making in the same way that I wouldn't impugn you for wearing clothing made by slaves. I wouldn't have you impugn me morally for eating the corpses of animals. I always think it's a good thing to go vegan. It's always better to do so. It makes you a better person. I just don't think it's morally obligatory.
Okay, I know this wasn't the topic of debate.
Oh no!
But did you want to go down this rabbit hole?
Yeah, we can probably hit the quick points. Yeah, hit me up. Let's do it. All right, chats. Check. It's real feisty. Let's go.
Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe somebody should be responsible for their consumption, like their economic choices.
Yeah, I think that from the perspective of a consumer, there is a degree of abstraction associated with purchasing a product that that from a virtue ethicist perspective sort of negates the moral ungood, the moral wrong that we've committed. Because we buy shit all the time that's made, the silicon farmed by slaves in Africa, plastic made in factory farms that pollute the earth, like that sort of thing. But we don't impugn each other for it.
Okay, so if you were to, there's pedophiles, right, who buy child pornography. Mm-hmm. Would you say they should not be held responsible for doing that?
Yes.
Really? Even though they're directly supporting child rape?
Yeah. I think it's hypocritical. If I bought my computer and the silicon in it was farmed in Africa by slaves, if I can do that and that's legal and no one's going to call me out on my shit, then yeah, I have to be consistent in that respect.
Okay, look, I think there's levels to this. So I wouldn't equate buying a computer to buying child pornography. I mean, it's in order to pretty much have a job anymore, you need a computer. So do you really think it's reasonable to equate something like buying something that might cause some amount of cruelty, exploitation in the world that you need for your job, just to be able to not be homeless, to something that you're buying purely for very shallow personal pleasure that causes horrible, irreparable damage to somebody lifelong?
I mean, we can actually partition it out. I don't know how much child pornography goes on the market these days. I haven't exactly checked, but I'd be willing to bet that the total amount of suffering that goes into the child slaves that mine out the silicon in Africa, in terms of me supporting that industry, I mean, that's pretty bad. And I didn't have to buy a computer this big. I could have bought something smaller. I could have bought a little Chromebook. I don't wonder how many more hours slaves had to mine up that silicon to justify me being able to own this.
Well, it's not silicon. It's
is it
elements like coltan.
I'm pretty sure silicon is also mined up by slaves, but I'd have to refine
No,
my argument
silicon
about
is
things.
pretty damn abundant. You can get it everywhere. It's elements like coltan,
All right, well, let's go
and
with
those are
coltan then.
mostly found in the Congo.
But I'd go with it
Well,
too. Clothing I wear, put together by slave shop work or sweatshop workers. Sorry, glasses, like everything. And if you wanted to step beyond the slavery element, like all of the stuff that I buy, it goes towards corporations. I believe that wage slavery is unethical, the exploitation of workers, and everything you buy contributes to that, unless you're buying from a co-op.
okay, well, look, there are like I think we could both agree that reducing suffering in the world is a good thing, correct? Even if you can't get rid of all of it at once.
It's always a good thing to reduce suffering. Yes.
Right. So if you can make just a very simple change that could save a cow's life, like rather than buying a burger from, well, now you can fucking go to McDonald's and buy a fucking vegan burger. Like rather than getting a normal McDonald's burger, just choosing to get the Beyond Burger. Like, don't you think you have a bit of a moral responsibility when you can make such a simple decision like that?
I,
Like,
I will
if I
say,
could,
oh, yeah.
well, listen, like if I could, like I need a graphics card processor for my computer. I edit every day. If I could buy a graphics card or processor that was nearly as good but didn't require slave labor, then yeah, I'd get that those components.
I mean that's good. That's a good thing. No human being is capable of applying that standard to everything in their life.
You don't
Of
have to.
course. Well, no, of course
Well,
not.
I'm not expecting you. It's just that
It's
like
your choice, and I don't think you should be morally impugned for not being able to do that in every respect. So, for instance, maybe I eat meat, and that does contribute to harm in the world. However, maybe I own one less car than you do, or maybe there's some other way in which my purchasing habits mean that I've contributed less harm to the world. I think that vegans get a little bit myopic, associating themselves only with one way in which our purchasing choices can harm people and ignoring all of the others. When I point out there are many other ways in which our purchases hurt people, they'll say, oh, what aboutism? Why can't you do this? And I could make the same argument to you. Why couldn't you do that? Why drive when you could bike? At the end of the day, our society is structured in such a way to ensure that it is virtually impossible to live without funding unethical industries. Every time you don't fund them, that's a good thing, but I don't think you're a bad person for not doing that.
okay, well, the issue I've talked about this with Ask Yourself, some other activists like Paul Bashir. Um, the issue is when you're buying these products, so computer components that require coltan to be produced,
Mhm.
clothing that was made in some sort of sweatshop in India or something. You're not actually lowering the quality of life of these people. I would argue anyway.
Well,
These
that's a
people are
whole
doing
other.
these.
That's a
Well, there
whole other
are. Okay,
line.
well, listen. There are certain circumstances where I'd say you might be. I know in the Congo there was a problem with warlords taking over fucking mines and then them literally committing slavery. The UN has gotten involved in those sorts of things. I don't know how common that is anymore, and I do know there's tax penalties on companies that buy from those areas. But no, I would argue that you're not actually reducing the quality of life, or at the very fucking least, just brutally murdering someone, like literally slitting their throats open when you buy a T-shirt. So yeah, the working conditions in like India, like these sweatshops in India where they're making T-shirts, they're not great, but that's the best job available to them in that area. If that job wasn't there, okay, they'd be working in a field somewhere, or maybe they wouldn't have any work at all, and they'd just be entirely living off the land.
Well,
So they're
cows.
so look, I
Same with
sorry?
cows, right?
What?
I mean, they'd be all dead if we weren't factory farming them, huh?
Yeah, they'd be better off not existing.
Yeah, they're cute though. I mean, I like
Okay,
so
well,
I
wait,
so
wait,
uh, so
wait,
I
wait. I know you're being a bit facetious
no,
here,
they're cute.
but
Wait,
are you?
no, wait. I just meant they're cute.
No, I know you're being a bit facetious here with that like kind of joke, but like,
But I
dude,
do think they're cute. Wait, cows are actually really cute. I'm not being facetious.
no, not that's not the point I was making.
Oh,
The thing is, are you really saying that you'd rather live like you'd rather experience what the cow experiences, where it's brought into the world literally through rape. It's tortured and neglected its entire life. Like its testicles are cut off without any anesthesia. It's locked in a small confined area,
I don't want any of
suffers
these
from
things.
shit-like infections, and then its throat is slit open while it's fully conscious. And I've seen the shit
No,
personally.
I don't want.
There's
I
a
don't want
slaughterhouse
any
in
of these
Toronto.
things.
Well, look, when you buy meat, that is what you're supporting.
But I don't want
when
people.
you buy,
Wait, but I don't want slaves
listen,
either. I don't want people working in
listen.
sweatshops.
Well, no. Listen, when you're buying a T-shirt, you're not necessarily reducing their quality of life.
No,
even
no,
though
no,
their
no, wait,
life
hold on. I'm
might
sorry.
not
Wait,
be
hold on, hold
great.
on, hold on. I have to challenge you on this point. The
Okay.
idea that like if it weren't for all the good t-shirt jobs we were giving them, all these sweatshop laborers would have no choice but to go back to subsistence farming. I very strongly disagree. Developing nations' industries are deliberately kept hamstring by the World Bank and IMF, so American industries can export their slave labor to places where there are lower standards of labor, longer work days, and lower wages. If it weren't for the demand for these products, we would not be able to manufacture the economic and political capital to do this. All these systems, these aren't just like, they don't just like exist because they're there and we have to take advantage of them because otherwise like there'd be no alternative. That's the same argument a meat eater could make. Oh, the animal is just going to die at the factory anyway. Who cares if I pick up the meat at the grocery market? It's already been made. These systems exist because we perpetuate it. Every one of the hundreds of thousands or even millions of people who work in sweatshops right now are kept there in large part because of American industry, because people like me need our designer t-shirts and our Teesprings and what have you with the anime icons on top of them. All of these people, billions of people worldwide, are kept in poverty because the global underclass is necessitated through the existence of global international capitalism. I reject this argument that all other forms of systemic oppression are merely these emergent, exigent properties that we should take advantage of while we're here, because otherwise, like, what's the point? There's no alternative that is better for them anyway. I think that we meaningfully do harm, real harm, when we buy a t-shirt or what have you. Even when we pay taxes, I mean, every tax dollar that we go to the government, this gets sent to subsidies, war profiteers and what have you, the wars we send, the millions of people we kill. These are all decisions that we make, though admittedly, I don't know if paying your taxes is much of a free decision. I'm not saying that it's like that you shouldn't go vegan. I really think you should. I'm only saying that there are many ways in which our purchasing decisions influence the world, and vegans only seem to care about morally condemning people for one, as opposed to the many other ways. I'm pretty sure that in total harm done to the planet, owning a car rather than driving a bike outweighs like decades of meat eating, just for the amount of smog you're putting in the atmosphere and the amount of economic and environmental damage it does after the fact. That's all I'm saying. I agree with you on every prescription, and I want to see the meat industry taken down. I just won't say people are bad for not going vegan.
Okay, so the argument you're basically making is there's other ways to commit harm that most of us are engaged in. It's just that vegans are only focusing on one. What's the issue with that? Why not start with that one thing you're contributing to? That's very fucking easy to change, by the way. Trying to buy clothing that isn't made in some like poor country with a sweatshop, that's a lot more difficult. If you're going to go to order clothes online, if you're going to go to any local store, it's hard to track down clothing that is actually made with fair trade.
I mean,
so it's a lot fucking easier to do that with food.
I have never bought this argument that going vegan like is easy, but even if we were to take that as the case, if vegans wanted to admit like, yes, I will morally impugn people for this one way in which their consumptive practices hurt the world, and will ignore the 30 other ones that I also engage in, we'll just focus on this one because this one makes me feel good, then sure. But at that point, you're basically justifying hypocrisy. Why can't we say we should fight against all forms of systemic injustice as relentlessly as possible, but recognize that different people are capable of contributing to that process in different ways and not morally condemn those who don't?
Okay, well, Vesh, you're going to have to actually come up with an argument for why veganism is so difficult that you can't reasonably expect somebody to follow that.
No, veganism could be the easiest thing in the world, and I would still stand by this argument because there are probably very easy ways that that most people could like reduce their carbon footprint or make the world a better place through their consumptive habits. You know, even if veganism was like an on-off switch, but it's not, mind you. I mean, I love me some fucking cheese and sour cream. Okay, that's my shit.
Look, do you
Don't like eggs?
like? Are you understanding what you're saying? Like, you could literally make the same argument about child pornography. Like, okay, it's harder to find child pornography. Okay, you're gonna have to go on the dark web, find some pornography dealer, pay them a ton of money to like capture a child and rape them on camera, and like you're saying that you shouldn't have a responsibility not to support that.
Well, yeah, I don't think people should be held responsible for their consumptive decisions on a moral level.
Even when it comes to jumping through so many hoops to pay for a child to get horribly abused just so that you can reach peak sexual arousal.
If I wanted to right now, I could like dig really hard on the internet and find a necklace made of blood diamonds that were procured through like combat between like warlords in the Sudan, you know? And I could buy that and nobody would call me a piece of shit for doing it. I'd just wear the necklace and it'd look real pretty on my neck. I
think most people wouldn't call you out on that just because they're unaware of where the diamonds came from.
What? Why not?
What do you mean? Like, okay, if somebody's wearing a diamond necklace, you don't know if it's real, fake, if they're synthesized diamonds. So yeah, I'm pretty sure
the point that I'm making.
Where they came
well,
from.
Okay, we're venturing a little bit into hyperbole here because I'm pretty sure. Again, I don't know. I'm pretty sure it's pretty easy to buy child pornography on the dark web, so I don't know who's like going out of their way. Whatever the case may be, it just frustrates me that there are so many ways in which the things we buy and the products we consume affect the world detrimentally, but vegans are only interested in condemning people in this one way, for this one like specific subset. You know, nobody does this for cars versus bikes. Nobody goes around looking at people with cars and goes like, you really could have gotten a bike. Do you have any idea how much damage you're doing to the environment? Not just in the construction of that vehicle. Do you have any idea how much fucking pollution is being thrown out through the exhaust? Nobody does that. We recognize like, oh, maybe that person just has a long commute. Maybe that person just likes having a car they can blast music out of. We don't really give them shit for it. But we can all agree, whether we own cars or bikes, that things should probably be done about pollution, about global warming, about the auto industry. That's what I want to see done with veganism.
Okay, I see two issues here. I can agree with you on some level, but I see two big issues here. For one thing, you're treating all of these things as if they're equal. Supporting a Holocaust, supporting horrible child abuse, like literally child rape, is not the same thing as buying a car or buying a T-shirt. So I think it's totally...
we do support a Holocaust.
No, listen, I think it's totally unreasonable to claim that, supporting some crazy ongoing Holocaust of animals or supporting the rape of children is the same as buying a T-shirt that was made in a sweatshop in India. I think that's insane.
Wait. Why not? We're literally, our system of global capitalism is literally keeping hundreds of millions of human beings in squalid poverty. That's more suffering than that's more suffering than the literal Holocaust committed. And we keep that in part because we sustain the capitalist system that fuels it.
Look, I would disagree with that. I'd say the amount of suffering created in the animal agriculture industry and the amount of suffering and injustice that happened in the Holocaust is not equivalent to the issues with worldwide poverty that's being sustained, because of the systems you're mentioning.
I mean, millions die from malnutrition, from a lack of access to like medical care. All of this is being done under the watch of systems that are perfectly capable of sustaining the livelihood of these people. We do it because it's more profitable to do it, and it's more profitable to do it because we buy T-shirts from T-shirt companies. It's myopic. It's in the same way that you believe veganism should be open to everyone, not just people who are on board with intersectionalism. I believe that systemic critiques of society and the problems with our consumptive habits should belong to everyone, whether or not they themselves are capable of or willing to abstain from certain consumptive habits. And it's weird to me that I get basically woke scolded, which is what's happening right now by you and my chat, for not being vegan from people who will readily and willingly admit that they do other things they could have avoided doing that also hurt the world. It's weird. Like, this is a very arbitrary moral test.
That's another point I was going to get to. My second point is that you're going to have a difficult time actually proving, because this is going to be a topic of contention, that buying at least certain products from certain areas with a certain supply chain is demonstrably going to have a negative impact on the lives of people who are in that supply chain. Whereas in the animal agriculture industry, you know with 100% certainty that you are actually contributing to making something worse.
No, I would strongly disagree with that. I mean, I'm an anti-capitalist. I think funneling any money into a capitalist system is unethical because I don't believe wage slavery is ethical.
Okay, well, wait a second. I don't even understand what this has to do with capitalism. Like, you're basically saying any exchange of goods, essentially, is
in a capitalist system, because there's wage exploitation.
Why?
A portion of the wage,
well,
the surplus labor, the surplus value gets exploited. It gets taken by the owner. I think that's an unethical process, and I prop it up when I buy things from capitalist industries.
Okay. The issue is, though, like the same sort of exploit. Well, look, the issue is you can still have exploitation in a socialist or communist system.
Yeah, but not that form of exploitation. Wage slavery wouldn't exist.
Okay, sure, maybe not that form. Okay, well, maybe not that form of exploitation. But I'm sure you, sorry, I'm sure you could have other forms of exploitation. So, again, this doesn't even have anything to do with capitalism.
Well, no, it does, because that's the reason why I say it's unethical to buy anything from a capitalist industry. It's because of wage exploitation. Whereas if it was socialist, it would be ethical, because in that respect, the wage exploitation would no longer exist. So my argument would be less sound if we lived in a socialist society. I'll admit that. But right now, every single dollar I put into any industry will invariably go to people who have the class interests of you and me opposed diametrically to their own. Assuming you and I are proletarian, and I think that's unethical. So I could inure myself to the inescapable immorality of buying anything in this system, or I can recognize that it is possible to at once fight for systemic change while wallowing in the consumptive habits that you would like to see others stop. Or, as someone once put it, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism.
Okay, even given that, this argument you're creating still doesn't really make any sense. You could still have exploitation with some sort of transaction of goods.
Oh, well, sure, but
so
not
I'm still. Well, what does it matter if it's intrinsic?
Because then it's possible to have those exchange of goods without there being that oppressive element. Like right now, if you bought from a worker co-op, I don't think that would be inherently unethical, because the wealth would be distributed equally amongst those who work there, not to some owner.
Okay.
I mean, I agree. I want to see the world rid of meat farming just as much as you. I just think that people shouldn't be too selective with which consumptive habits they condemn other people for and which consumptive habits they brush over.
Okay, so I'm still not understanding how this even matters with regards to capitalism. Because again, the argument I'm making here is that just because you're making some sort of exchange in goods, that doesn't mean automatically you're going to be ruining the life of somebody else.
No, not
whereas
intrinsically.
Whereas in the animal agriculture industry, you absolutely are.
Well, no, because in a capitalist system,
even under capitalism, like, this is another issue. Like, you're equating all forms of injustice, like even wage slavery, even unequal pay. You're equating that to
I'm not equating
really
all of them.
torturing and murdering animals.
Well, no. I mean, I don't want to, like, the idea that, like, capitalism begins and ends with people not being paid as much as they should is not the case. Again, a third of the world is kept in perpetual poverty, and it's through the IMF and World Bank, which are the capitalist arms of the Western world. These are very substantial problems. Not to mention the wars we wage. I mean, God, Coca-Cola just with the death squads in Colombia. I mean, there's so much. The argument that I'm making fundamentally is that so in regards to the capitalist issue, wage exploitation or surplus labor being extracted from the laborer is when you work a job and you produce $15 worth of widgets during the time that you work, you're paid for 10 of them. 5 of those dollars worth of value gets extracted from you, gets thrown right up to the owner, or to the manager, and then to their manager, and so on and so forth. There's a chain. But it gets taken from you. And I think that's a form of slavery. You're not really getting you're getting expropriated. You're not really getting the full compensation for your labor. It's a pretty fundamental element of anti-capitalist critique. I think it's essentially tantamount to slavery, though admittedly, much better than chattel slavery. I got it, I'm not drawing an equivacy between those two. And anytime you buy anything from any capitalist firm, you are contributing to that process, because that's how the money rolls there. It wouldn't be the case at a worker co-op, because it would be distributed evenly amongst those who work there, but worker co-ops are pretty few and far between.
Your argument seems to boil down to we can't get rid of all forms of exploitation, so therefore I have reasonable grounds to support one form of exploitation.
But don't you realize that's already coming from a point of bias? You could say the same thing about cars. What if I was an anti-car advocate and I wanted the car and bicycle thing? I would be making the same argument to you, wouldn't I? You would be like, oh, well, sure, okay, cool, you don't eat animals, great. But what about the car? Like, what you're saying, what you're accusing me of doing essentially is whataboutism. I'm saying I don't have to do good here because there's so much bad everywhere. I'm not saying there's so much bad everywhere, therefore I don't have to do this good thing. I'm saying our entire lives and every element of our culture is saturated in harm when we make consumptive decisions. And for that reason...
And why not reduce that harm?
You should. It's a good thing too. I just don't think you're a bad person for not doing it. And if you were walking down the street and you had $100 in your wallet and we passed by a homeless person, I wouldn't give you shit for not giving all 100 of those dollars to the homeless person, even though they sure as shit need it more than you do. That would be a good thing of you to do, but I wouldn't give you shit for not doing it, because I recognize there's a difference between doing good and being obligated to do good.
This is sounding very close to an appeal to futility.
No, it's not that it's futile. I want to demolish the meat industry and capitalism. Those are both two essential pillars of what I'm in favor of. What I'm saying is that you can't morally impugn people.
Let me just make it very simple for you. What is your excuse for eating meat?
I don't need an excuse for eating meat. Do you need an excuse for not giving the homeless person $100? You're a pretty successful YouTuber. I'm sure you have spare money you could be donating to charities right now.
Not right now, I don't. Do you want to make
excuses for that?
Yeah, well, not right now, I don't. And I do occasionally donate to charity. They're mostly animal charities.
Was it really necessary of you to buy that expensive chair you're sitting on right now? Those headphones are nicer than mine. I'm wearing $6 earbuds. Do you have excuses for why those money didn't go to people here? Like, you could do this forever.
Okay, well, look. Well, no, again, you're equivocating. Like, you're making... This is just again, you keep making this false equivalence that every single action you do, it could be optimized in some sort of way. Therefore, you don't have to optimize any decision.
I'm saying there's a difference between doing a good thing and being morally obligated to do a good thing. I think it's a good thing to be vegan. You think it's morally obligatory to be vegan, in that I'm a bad person if I don't. But you and I both agree it's good to donate to charity, but we don't think it's morally obligatory to donate every spare cent you have to charity. We recognize this distinction in other respects. A lot of vegans don't hear.
Okay, well, look, I think that's because we value our own personal freedoms, and even if we have this idea that we don't just live for the well-being of others, we also have to respect our own personal wishes, but there's limits to that. When your own personal actions have such a negative impact on other people or beings around you, that's when your own personal freedoms come to an end. And what you're doing here is saying, okay, well, if you're going to criticize me for buying meat, well, okay, I could criticize you for buying that pair of headphones. You could have bought a tiny little pair of earbuds, and that would have, I don't know, spared somebody slave labor in some other country.
You could have literally saved like a dozen people's lives with the money it took to buy those headphones.
Whatever. The thing is,
exactly.
No,
we need to work
no.
on breaking down the system because fuck it, whatever, dude. I can't optimize every single personal consumptive decision I make to optimize well-being. We wouldn't expect that from anyone else.
That's right, but it's like, look, veganism is so incredibly easy to do. I mean,
it doesn't matter how
look,
easy it is. It would be easy to give the $100 to the homeless person. It'd be the easiest thing in the world. You're so ripped, dude. You could literally flex the wallet out of your jeans pocket. It'd be incredibly easy for you to do so. But I wouldn't call you a bad person for not doing it. Again, this is why we agree on every prescriptive judgment. I'm so in favor of every judgment vegans have about the world, and I argue about this all the time. I want the meat industries. I would support eco-terrorism against them. Put the CEOs in there, and everything else is TOS. Okay, I'm so on board with it. I just think it is hypocritical to selectively decide which elements of the consumptive process you're going to morally impugn people for. And that's it. That's the only difference that you and I have. But we will still fight towards the same goals. We still agree fundamentally on the same points.
Okay, so if this were like, I don't know, 200 years ago, would you say the same thing about the African slave trade?
The only, and I think that's a good counter. The only differentiation I would make there is that I would not fault someone for buying a slave. I would fault someone for owning a slave. I think that the consumptive decision is above moral rebuke. The decision to keep a slave, however, continues that process. The ethical thing to do there would be to buy the slave and then in the next moment free them, or something like that. I think that's where it falls apart, because it's after the point of consumption, the harm continues with slavery, because they're...
Then you'd be against animal agriculture.
I am against animal agriculture.
Well, then you'd consider it a moral obligation to be against animal agriculture.
I do. I think it's a moral... Yes, I think you're a bad person if you're not against moral agriculture. Just not being vegan.
No. Based on the argument you just gave, you would be morally obligated to not support animal agriculture.
Yeah, I don't. Except for consumptively.
Well, you do.
Well, consumptively, yes. In the same way that I would support slavery consumptively, but not in any other way. Because you'd free them right after you've consumed the product, so to speak.
Okay, so if we were to if in a hypothetical reality where we were using black people as meat, what would you say then?
We always gotta get so grim.
No, let's cover that.
Like if it was the same thing, like with animals.
Yeah, if we had fields of black people, and once they reached a certain age, once they were nice and big and meaty, we killed and ate them.
Yeah, I mean, I'd still buy that fucking. I'd still buy that dark meat from the supermarket. Yeah, it's the exact same thing. I think that animals are morally equivocal to people. Yeah, I'd be a hypocrite if I said otherwise. White people too. Get that fresh, both cuts.
Okay, that's that's like Destiny level of insanity.
No, I just don't think people should. Wait, you say that, but you buy stuff from industries that literally like have slave labor. You buy stuff from industries that profiteer off of wars. Like Coca-Cola literally ran death squads in Latin America. Have you ever bought a Coke? Well, I don't. Actually, they're probably not vegan, right? So
I actually don't buy soda.
Okay, that's soda. I don't like soda either. But like if you bought a Coke anytime over the past decade, you're literally funding people who are paying death squads to run around, gunning down like labor organizers, so that Coca-Cola can continue to get its like low fucking like bargain basement cost of harvesting.
Okay. So here's the issue I'm seeing. You're basically saying you're guilty of every. You seem to make the assumption that you're guilty of every single transaction, every single monetary transaction you make. So if you gave somebody $5 for a hat, if that person you gave $5 to is putting that $5 towards slavery or uses that $5 to fund a death squad, you are now responsible for that.
That's your position with the meat. That's not my position. I don't think
Are
you are. I
you
don't think you're
sure?
morally responsible for for your consumptive decisions.
Okay, well, that's weird. Your explanation, it sounds like you want it both ways then.
No, I think that we do horrible things with the dollars that we spend, all of us, and we should work to collapse those systems. However, again, no ethical consumption under capitalism. There's no way to live life ethically under this system unless you want to go become a woodsman or something. And even then, you'll probably fuck up somehow. You'll probably have to eat animals if you're a woodsman, right? Unless you get a farm started real quick. Whatever the case may be, I think it is good to fight against these bad things. It's always good to maximize well-being. I don't think it makes you a bad person to not do so. For the same reason I wouldn't impugn you for not spending more money donating to fucking whatever. I don't donate any money to charity. Fuck it. I'm way too paranoid about one day losing all of this. And nobody calls me out for it. I get called out for eating meat once a week though. It's very strange to me. I don't know. We share so many of the same goals.
Okay, well, I think the reason people are calling you out for eating meat is just because, again, they don't equate every single financial transaction as some sort of act of cruelty or exploitation. And on top of that, I don't think they accept the idea that every transaction you make somehow harms someone else.
Only in the capitalist framework because of wage exploitation. I don't. I mean, there are people who don't believe, like people like Destiny, for example, who don't give a fuck because they don't believe that animals deserve any kind of like ethical rights, you know, that you should be able to just murder or beat or torture animals all you want. They deserve no moral consideration. That's a moral framework that would allow you to like not be a vegan and for it to be perfectly ethical. Like legitimately, if you just don't give them ethical consideration. Now, I think everyone does, whether they know it or not, but I think you're in the same boat. You're kind of like Destiny in that respect. You don't see the fundamental harm that is done to the world by propping up the capitalist superstructures we live in, because that's just not. It's not a consideration. I never said I was
pro-capitalist.
Well, no, but to the extent that I am, I imagine I'm more anti-capitalist than you, at least judging by the arguments that we're making here.
I'm not exactly sure on that. I think capitalism is sort of a part of an evolution to a better monetary system. Socialism? But like with things like automation, capitalism just isn't going to live forever. I think technology is just going to make the idea obsolete.
Uh-oh. Are you a Yang fan?
I don't totally agree with everything he says, but he does make a good point about universal basic income.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm glad, fuck capitalism. I'll agree with anyone who doesn't like capitalism. Whatever the case may be.
Well, look, I agree with you that
Nazis don't like capitalism.
Well, look, I agree with you that there is a level of exploitation with every transaction you make within capitalism, and just inherently, it's a mathematical certainty that you're going to have poverty under capitalism. So I think it's kind of stupid. We could do better than that, but yeah, I think we'd agree there. But
fuck yeah. I mean, it's more radical than fucking most people are. I understand, like, these arguments get lost in the weeds really quickly. The only point that I'm really, really adamant about making, it's not that appeal to futility, the world is terrible, there's no point in trying. It's only that in most instances, people assign no moral value whatsoever to one's unwillingness to engage in consumptive behaviors that would increase well-being. So spending more time to buy the couch that wasn't made by the company that did this, spending more time to buy the food that wasn't farmed using migrant labor, finding all the little ways to optimize your consumptive decisions to make the world a little less shitty of a place. Nobody will call you a bad person for not doing that. Nobody will. Absolutely nobody. Now, people will say you're good if you do those things. They'll go ahead and say, oh, that's very nice of you. You shop conscientiously, blah, blah, blah. But no one will condemn you. But vegans will condemn you. They'll say you're a bad person if you don't, well, if you're not vegan. And I agree. You're probably a bad person if you don't believe in animal rights. You're probably a bad person if you don't believe in ending the meat industry and what have you. I want those systems gone. But in regards to the other examples I gave, like
look, if you want these systems
optimizing
gone,
decisions.
then why would you support them?
Well, I mean, I want like capitalism gone, but I support it too.
Well, dude, that's a bit different. Like, I mean, you're living in the real. There's practical issues. Like, okay, it's kind of unreasonable to expect you to go totally homeless so that you don't support capitalism.
I could
And
support less
obviously-
unethical industries, probably.
Well, here's the thing. It's very easy not to support the animal agriculture industry, and you're making
You
it
keep
seem
saying
as
that.
if all of these. No, it is. Okay, well, do you want to try?
Oh, no. Well, it doesn't matter to me. Again, even if going vegan was the easiest thing in the world, so is giving money to the homeless person you pass. But we still don't impute people for not doing it.
Okay, well,
so it wouldn't
the
matter
thing-
how easy
okay,
it
well,
is.
wait,
But it's
wait,
not
wait,
easy.
wait. Well, wait. The difference there is you're helping someone, whereas the difference with the animal agriculture industry is you're just not promoting that suffering.
Okay, well then I think that's a meaningless distinction. The positive and the
think
negative
I
of
think it
preventing
is.
and enabling harm. Well, then you could say like, oh, I'm not actually hurting anyone. I'm just buying meat that's already dead. But if you want to maintain that distinction, then fine. Buying a Coca-Cola, which goes towards a corporation that funds death squads. I mean, we don't morally impugn people for buying Coca-Cola.
That doesn't. Well, no, that doesn't make any sense. That's like saying, oh, well, I'm not paying for murder when I pay for a hitman.
Well,
Uh,
I don't.
I-
But
that
I don't think we're
argument you
paying
made
for
doesn't
any
make-
of it because I think we're absolved of the responsibility. I think it's always frustrating me because I feel like when I talk to vegans, we're in agreement on every single judgment, conceivably, and we always end up walking away angry at each other, and it's so frustrating. I just want us to be friends, vegan gains.
You want to fight me in a cage?
No, you're much larger
I'm
than
just
I am.
joking. I'm just joking. People just expect me to say that by now.
I all right.
Okay, well, you know what? I'll say this. I think it is still a topic of contention that certain monetary transactions you make, like buying a T-shirt, I think it is still a topic of contention that you are necessarily contributing to harm. So I think that's sort of a debate for another day. And actually, Ask Yourself is messaging me on Facebook where he wants to have a debate on that.
But the discussion with him went the same. I have to talk to like an anarchist vegan or something, and I'll probably get mad at them because I want my cheesy bits. All right, listen. This is actually an infinitely more productive and decent and level-headed conversation than I was expecting.
All right, well, at least that's good.
All
And
right.
hey, man, like, look, going vegan is really fucking easy, and there's personal benefits too, dude. Like, if it stops animal deaths, if it makes you healthier, if it makes you happier, it makes you feel better about yourself, why not do it?
All right. I don't disagree with
dude,
you. There are a lot of
dude,
benefits to veganism, and reciprocally. Oh, yes.
Well, dude, you've got me on Twitter. If you ever need any help with like vegan dieting, if you want to transition, I'm right there.
Gotcha. And you know what? I'm throwing it back. Likewise, remember, friends, intersectionality is the lens through which we will be able to combat the systemic injustices we face on a day-to-day level. Even if you benefit from privilege, man, cisgender, straight, or what have you, I bet you there are ways in which your life can be improved. And intersectionality has the answer because only it is capable of discursively recognizing the way in which society is fucking you over. All right, and you can hit me the fuck up. Hey.
Oh, and by the way,
yeah?
What's your stance on guns?
I'm very pro-gun.
Okay, cool.
Are you
All right, I was just
gun
wondering.
friendly as well?
Oh yeah. I was just wondering. I've been looking for a debate to have on firearms for a while. Nobody'll do it. Even
Listen,
that
as long as we're
pussy.
pointing those guns away from the cows and towards the
Yeah.
pigs, am I right?
Yeah, exactly.
Cops. All right. Hey, thank you very much for the discussion. I appreciate it. Trans rights, comrade.
Yeah, no problem. All right. Well, take
Farewell.
care.